everyone, and welcome to the Cool Down Room. I'm Alise, and it's race week, so let's talk about the Chinese Grand Prix. First of all, you may notice that I am doing this episode alone. That is because as I record this, Chloe is still sick. You may remember that she was sick last week. She is somehow still sick, and so to give her a break, I am recording all by myself today. Also, there is apparently a leak in the Formula One paddock. After Australia, we did not see this when we were recording the last episode, but during Australia, there was like a driver's meeting, as there always is, and then information about that driver's meeting was leaked to the media. A lot of people jumped to assuming that it was drivers, but there were FIA personnel there. There are more than just the drivers there. Obviously, we don't know who the leak is. I honestly don't really care much who it is. I mostly just want to know why. What is the reason to risk your job, risk being the guy who can never be hired again because you've lost everybody's trust in you? You risk a lot by leaking that information to the media. So what is the reason behind that? Question mark. Third thing, before we get into race details, the Bahrain and Saudi Arabian Grand Prix have been canceled. Those were meant to take place in April. However, due to the current war in the Middle East, those are not happening. Chloe and I have not yet decided what we will be doing instead. There will probably be some rewind episodes to talk about some history. Maybe I'll do a history of the Bahrain or Saudi Arabian tracks. But we're not sure yet. Right now, what's important is that the people in those countries that are being affected by the war in the Middle East and in Iran are okay. That is way more important than the safety of the people in those countries and of the people who work in Formula One is way more important than us getting 24 races. So FP1, I have finally seen the driver intro. I get why Chloe hates it. I think they might have changed it because Lando is at the end of this one, but I kind of get why Chloe hates it. It is definitely not their best work. I've also never seen someone outside of California do a hang 10 sign besides Kimi. And so I'm so fascinated that the Italian driver is out here with that. I was watching, this is just my notes, so it's probably not going to be as fun as it normally is. But the first thing I noticed when FP1 started is I was watching it, and they usually have like a little shot of Alex, Jolyn, and David in the commentary box. And I saw them, I was like, damn, the height difference between Alex and Jolyn is so funny because Alex is like a full head shorter than Jolyn, and it just makes me laugh. Franco spun and did start going the wrong way on track. And Lando and Lewis kind of tapped at Lando's right front. I do believe it was Lewis that ran into him kind of as they were fighting, but little tippity tappity. And then Lewis had a rear lockup and went off track. So, karma, I guess, but not really. There were a lot of virtual safety cars. There's been a lot of VSCs, and I think we all just have to deal with that. But there was a VSC for debris. The sound cut out while the marshals were grabbing the debris to the point that you could hear where they were supposed to be talking because the audio you could hear the cars running, but at one point the audio for the cars running went quieter, and I was like, oh yeah, they're supposed to be talking right now. And then when they came back, Alice and Sam were commentating, and there was no notice or mention of the change. It just made me laugh when the marshals were coming in. The guy on the sidelines was waving them in and telling them to hurry up, and they had to do a little run. One of the RBs was gone. I'm not sure who or what happened. I meant to look into that, but I looked up, and there was 25 to 30 minutes left, and one of the RBs had vanished. There were 26 minutes left, sorry, and Carlos still had not gone out because he had a data issue, which this is a sprint weekend. You need FP1 because that is your only practice the entire weekend. So that was not great. Both McLarens were snapping. Also not great. The McLarens are not having a great year so far. It's been 2 races. They're fine. They're going to be fine. They're going to be fine, I say, as though they actually raced. The rubber was this is for Franco. The rubber was flying off of his front left tire. And then he stopped in the pit lane and his crew had to jog to him. He just like stopped in the middle of the pit lane and the poor fucking Alpine pit crew just had to do a little jog. I also learned something new during FP1, and that is that if teams don't put fans on the car's brakes, then the brakes will catch fire in the paddock or in the garage. They have what are apparently just very fancy leaf blowers, and they attach said very fancy leaf blowers to the car. And then everything is okay. And that is so, Jesus, you know, just guys, I feel like we're at the point where I feel like we've been doing this sport this is the 76th year of this sport. I feel that the brakes should not catch fire without fans on them while in the garage. So, but you know, it is what it is. At one point, Lewis's engineer told him he was in P3 and he was in P4, and Lewis asked his engineer to give him a plan, and his engineer absolutely did not. So, you know, Ollie spun right at the end of FP1, so that was not great for him, but he also had a pretty good weekend. So, you know, sprint quali. So as we know, China was a sprint race, which means that there is, instead of, 3 practice sessions, quali, and a race, there is 1 practice session, sprint quali, and a race. And I'm going to be so honest, very little happened. Most of my sprint quali notes are just like things that were happening around and things with the fans. Like in SQ1, they showed fans, and there was a lady with a Red Bull jacket on that they showed at the very beginning when they show, people in the grandstands and everything. And her hair looked really good. And I just wanted to compliment her on her hair because her blowout looked really good. There was also, they showed this a couple of times, but there was also a ginormous 44 flag, and there were a bunch of little 44 flags. They all looked the same. So like a bunch of those flags kind of got passed out to a bunch of people, but they were all in the same section. So I think maybe they were all there together, but I'm not entirely sure. Let's actual race stuff. There's very little of it. Isaac said a 134, and then this was like within the first 2 minutes of sprint quali. Isaac said a 134, and the Valtteri immediately said a 149 lap time, and they were the first times anyone had set, but it just made me so sad because the gap in that was just depressing. And then Checo had a fuel systems issue and couldn't join, and I will say the one good thing about I am a Mercedes fan, yes, but I am also a Cadillac fan because I like having what feels like a truly American team on the grid. We're all just happy to be here. The good part about being a fan of a brand new team is that everybody is just happy to be here. Max was saying that he hates driving these cars and that it's like Mario Kart, and it could just be sour grapes. I think it's a little bit of sour grapes, to be quite honest. I think it is simply because he is not winning. If he was winning, he would be a lot happier with what was going on. SQ2, this is the first note is also a fan. Someone had a sign that said good luck with Charles's face on it, and I thought that was quite clever. Lando said that, okay, so at one point, Lando was coming around and Kimi was on the racing line, and Kimi was doing an outlap, so Kimi was not pushing at all. And Lando said that Kimi got in his way, and I think that it is total crap. But Lando was like, I was going to push. And we have no way of knowing if Lando was actually going to push. But also I don't think anything came of this because I heard literally nothing about it for the rest of the weekend. But also Nico, Esteban, Liam, Gabby, Arvid, and Franco. And then Isaac was not out, but they did have to go get him from down the pit lane. In Franco fashion, they had to go jog to get him. In SQ3, I have 2 notes. Number 1, they were playing fucking Avicii. Number 2, literally nothing happened. Nothing happened during sprint quali 3. Literally nothing. I'm sorry. Look, I wish it had been more interesting. Sprint was also quite boring. Some of these are so boring. I'm so sorry. This is not gonna be my favorite of the episodes we've done, just because honestly, not that much happened until I think race day. Sprint starts, and I quote, Max Verstappen is really struggling, and he's in 8th. Guys, just put it into perspective here. Objectively, for Max's standards, that is struggling. And yes, he did almost immediately go down to P14. But if I was any other driver and they were like, damn, Max Verstappen is struggling so bad, and he was in P8, I would be so pissed. Like, I would be, I'm sorry, I am here if I was a midfielder, like backfield driver, and I heard that, I would be so annoyed. Like, yes, he's Max Verstappen, but like, if he's struggling, think of the rest of us. The rest of us are in hell. Track temperature, for those of us who use Freedom measurements, was 55 degrees. So that's not great. Williams went into the pits immediately, and I was quite concerned for them, but I couldn't tell who it was. Kimi and Isaac had contact, and a bit of Isaac's car came off, and then Kimi got a 10-second penalty, which, you know what? Fair enough. Lewis was at the front, and I was very happy about it, but Lewis was in P1, and the commentator said, welcome back to the front, Lewis Hamilton. It's been a while, and it felt very bittersweet. Yes, it has been a while and everything, but also that was the sprint race. But also Lewis is having a great season so far, so you know. I love George with my entire heart and soul, and I want him to be a world champion. However, the order in which I want the next world champions is Lewis, and then George, and then Kimi. And I say that because I think that after Lewis gets his 8th, he will be able to retire. And as much as I adore Lewis, I think that will be a good thing. Same thing with like Fernando. Like, I love Fernando, but he needs to retire. And I don't think that either one of them are necessarily like, I don't think either one of them is washed up. I think they're still great at their jobs. However, they have been in the sport for so long and have seen so much, and so many other drivers have come and gone. And I think that it's kind of like, it's time. Even if you're not washed up, even if you're still great at your job, there comes a time when in a sport like this, you have to make way for new people. And once Lewis gets his 8th, I think he will be able to do that. And so I think I want Lewis next, because then we make way for some new people and for some new blood, and I think that would be good for the sport. As if we didn't just have like 5 rookies last year, but my point still stands. And then I love George, and I want him to be WDC, so obviously George next and Kimi after that, because Kimi is phenomenal, and I think he is going to be WDC very, very soon. At least in the next few years, assuming Mercedes doesn't screw anything up. And then we get to Charles saying he thought Lewis was struggling, but I don't know. I kind of not necessarily disagree, but at one point, Charles and Lewis were very much fighting, and they were racing the entire weekend, but they were enjoying that, and that's a good thing. They did have a bit of contact, Charles and Lewis, which scared me, but apparently Alex, it made me gasp, but Alex like started to crouch behind Jolyn in the commentary box, and I was like, yeah, no, I feel you. I was nervous. This is the one thing I appreciate about Ferrari, is that they let their drivers race, especially this early in the season. They know, Fred Vasseur knows he has 2 good drivers, and so he is letting them race, and that is a good thing. I have always maintained that it is a good thing, that in the first half of the season, you need to let your drivers race, and then when you get to the second half of the season, you can pick based on points who's going to be gunning for WDC and who's going to be defending them and helping them do that. And then it just resets at the start of the next season. There's just a straight line of Ferrari notes, but they showed a lot of Lewis's mom, and I don't really know why. At one point towards the end, at the like very last race, one of the commentators said Happy Mother's Day, so I think it might have been British Mother's Day, but I don't know. Arvid had to go into the pits during the sprint. Apparently he spun on the opening lap, but they didn't show it, but he did get 12 laps in, so that's good. Valtteri also had to retire, and Nico went off track and just stopped. And this happened at the exact same time. And then there was a full safety car. And this was around lap 12 or 13, and there were 19 laps in the sprint race. So, you know, not exactly fun. Kimi got to serve his penalty, though, so he only went down to P7 because he served his penalty during the safety car. Apparently, the guy driving the safety car has done 500 races as of Australia, so that's cool as hell. And then Checo got a 5-second penalty for some reason that I didn't catch. During quali and before the race, and I think they've started including this, or maybe I just didn't catch it before, but they had this like weird little trailer beforehand with really dramatic violin music. and that was like kind of in time with the cars. And one of the commentators, I think it was Alex, was like talking in the background very dramatically about Formula One. And I don't know why they played that, because it was not the driver intro, but it was very cool. One of the commentators said, and I quote, "There's an intra-team battle at Mercedes." And I would argue there absolutely is not. I don't think that there is an intra-team battle. I think that George and Kimi are allowed to race, at least right now, and that's a good thing. I don't think that there's an internal battle at Mercedes, at least not right now, because Kimi is so young. I think that's why. I think if Kimi and George were the same age and had the same amount or like years of experience, then it would be much more, battle-esque. But right now, I really don't think that there's a battle going on at Mercedes. I think that George is favored for, we know that George is favored for WDC, and I think Kimi is racing his best, and I think they're both racing their best, and that does not mean that there's a battle going on. It just means that they're both good drivers. So those out were Carlos, Alex, Fernando, Valtteri, Lance, and Checo. So I'm pretty sure that is actually the exact same as we're out in. Yeah, so that is the exact same as we're out in Sprint Quali 1, so that's cute. And they go back into the pits as usual, and in the Williams pit, you hear Alex on the radio go, "Terrible." And immediately after, they played Carlos saying, "That was a good lap." So they have two very different outlooks on what is going on. And you know what? Good for them. One race note, yellow flag because Gabby went off. And I say went off as though he did not fully slam the back of his car into a wall. So, those out, Nico, Franco, Esteban, Liam, Arvid, and Gabby. And that was in Q2. And then literally nothing else happened in Q2. George stopped in the middle of the road, and the hazard lights were on. If you did not know, this was a driver request, but they added hazard lights to the cars, which I quite like. I think that should have been in there from the beginning, but I enjoy that they have hazard lights, and I think it's just like, hazard lights on cars on the road. It's how you let other drivers know that something is wrong, and especially if things are foggy out, then, George goes, his engineer goes, "It looks good," about the car, and George immediately goes, "It's not." And he had to go off, and he didn't set a time in Q3 at first because he was having engine problems, but he did eventually get out again. And when Kimi was setting his pole time, George was on an out lap. So George did one actual time setting lap and still got P2 on the grid. So, I feel like that just says a lot about him and about the car that he is driving. Some people have been annoyed recently because George isn't admitting that Mercedes has the fastest car on the grid, and I don't blame him. I would not want to jinx myself like that. That's so valid. I'm sorry. And also, people would be mad if he was admitting that he had the fastest car on the grid. So, comme ci, comme ça. Kimi became the youngest pole sitter in F1 history, which was lovely. Now we get into the race, which was, of course, as usual, the most eventful part of the weekend, but also still not that eventful. Alex started from the pit lane because they changed the suspension, and then Gabby was in the pit because he had a hydraulics issue, but he did not start. So Lando and Oscar also did not start. They were having some kind of like unspecified issue. And then Pierre had to back up a bit because Pierre, based on where he was in the grid, I want to say Lando and Oscar were P5 and 6, and Pierre then was right behind, I want to say Lando, because Pierre was P7, and then he went up a little bit too far and he had to like back up. And it's always funny to me when you see an F1 car reverse, but he had to go back up a little bit because he went too far over the start line, because the McLarens were supposed to be in front of him, and so in front of him there was just an empty spot, and so he was like, oh, I can, I go up to the empty spot, and then he, I guess, thought that was his start spot because there was an empty spot right in front of him, and it was not. They all still start in P7 even if people are off. And like in this case, I think is a really good example of, even if somebody is in the pits and, their spot is empty, their spot stays empty on the grid. They don't, another driver doesn't take that spot. Alex at one point just got out of his car, and I was like, son of a bitch, like that man is not starting, and he did not. Lap 1, the Mercedes were fighting, and it led to Lewis taking the lead. Live, laugh, love. this will come back later. And there was an immediate yellow flag because I actually don't know why. Because Checo and Valtteri hit each other at the second corner, but they were both fine. So I think it might have been a debris thing. I did not know why there was a yellow flag because I don't think they actually said. And then Isaac did a little spin when he and Ollie were fighting. So Isaac and Ollie were fighting quite early on, and they were racing, and then Isaac, I think, just turned the wheel a bit too much and lost his grip and spun right in front of Ollie. And so Ollie had to go incredibly wide to go around him. So not fun. Max was having tire issues at lap 8, and he was the only one on the softs. The expectation was that if you started on softs, I think the expectation was to be able to get to lap like 15-ish, and he could not. Like he came in, I don't remember exactly what lap he came in, but I know it was before lap 15. At this point, they had a shot of Oscar, and he did not look happy. And Oscar did not start the race, so that's valid. He is not one to, as we know, he is not one to show his emotions very visually. But you know when somebody just has like an angry vibe about them, or like a I'm having a bad day vibe? That's kind of what Oscar had. And you know what? That's so valid. Like he didn't start the race, and last year he was fighting for a championship. So, not the greatest. It's so valid to not, he was not having a good day, and it was quite evident that he was not having a good day. Oh, I was wrong. Alex did start the race. Because Liam, Alex, and Max went into the pits at the same time. I guess Alex did start the race, and I was just, who else didn't start the race? I thought it was 4 people who didn't start the race, but maybe I was wrong. Lance went off at lap 10, and then he just stopped. And there was a yellow flag in a safety car, and it took until lap 12 for them to get his car off. And Kimmy commented on it, and he said the safety car's going really slow. And his whole thing was mainly because he was discussing, he was kind of trying to signal, the tires thing is going to be an issue, because at that point, keeping your tires warm and everything becomes paramount. But, also the safety car was going really slow because they were taking so long to get his car off. After the safety car, Kimmy, Franco, and Esteban were top 3. And honestly, I would have been okay with that podium. I would have been so okay with that podium. There was a grip issue at this point because George had no grip. I think a lot of people were struggling a little bit with grip. At one point, one of the commentators goes, Lewis has not won a GP since Belgium 2024. He's got to be so tired of that shit. Lewis has got to be so tired of being reminded that he has not won a Grand Prix since Belgium of 2024. So in almost 2 years. I would be so annoyed if people kept being like, yeah, he's the GOAT, but he hasn't won in 2 years. I would be so mad if people were saying that about me. Like, I would be so annoyed. So he's got to be so tired of that. There was a slippery surface on the track, but I don't know where, and neither did anybody else. So they were literally the commentators were like, it says there's a slippery surface somewhere, but I don't know where. I can't tell. And then there was a little quick yellow flag for some debris. Pierre and Max had something with moving under braking, and I could not tell what it was because it came up and then it went away pretty quickly. By lap 25, Charles and Lewis were fighting, and George was right behind them, and Kimmy was just sat there building the gap, which honestly, great for George and Kimmy, because if I'm George, I'm doing to Ferrari exactly what Ferrari did to me at the beginning of the race, where the Mercedes were fighting, and so Lewis was able to slip by and take first, right? So right now, the Ferraris are fighting, and so George is going to be able to slip by them because they're going to be distracted by each other, and, you just bide your time and you wait. Or, they'll take each other out, which did not happen this time, but George was able to slip by, and he slipped past Charles, and then he was able to slip past Lewis. And also great for Kimmy because he kept the lead for, over what was it at that point? I want to say 30 laps. So, while George was, biding his time, waiting to overtake the Ferraris, he goes, man, they're just fast in all the right places. Yes, George. That's what an F1 car is supposed to be. And then George immediately passed Charles. So, and then at that point, there was, by the time George got up to the front, there was an 8-second gap between George and Kimmy. Kimmy was at the front, but George was faster and had the fastest lap. And then at that point, Kimmy and George just started playing hot potato with fastest lap. Esteban had a 5.7 second pit stop. Gross. And then there was contact between Esteban and Franco. So, not the best sequence of events for him because Esteban had pieces of his car hanging off. And then Franco went out, but they didn't say why because, of course, they didn't. Lewis goes, I have no power. What do you mean you have no power, Lewis? How does that happen? And then Charles had a lockup and Lewis immediately went past him and got into third. You immediately passed your teammate. I think you're doing okay. But Charles was having fun. Charles was having fun with all of this. He was enjoying, racing his teammate, and I think that's a good thing. Kimi was going so fast that he had started to, lap, because towards the end he goes, this was not towards the end, Jesus Christ. He goes, oh, mate, this traffic is so bad. And I was like, Kimi, you're in first place. You're in P1. What do you mean the traffic is so bad? And I looked, and he was, I want to say, right behind whoever was in, what at this point would have been, I want to say, P17. Max had to retire at lap 26, so not fun. So he was not having a good weekend. And then Esteban, after having a 5.7 second pit stop, he then had a 26.9 second pit stop. And I know they were getting some loose stuff off his car, but damn, they had to cut a part of the carbon fiber off. They had to take what is effectively huge gardening shears and just snip, which is so funny to me. Right at the end of lap 53, there were 56 laps of the Grand Prix, and right at the end of lap 53, Kimi went off the road at the hairpin because he had a front right lockup, and it was terrifying. I gasped so bad. And Bono goes, 3 laps remaining, let's just get this home. And the commentators were like, yeah, Bono's been through it. He's been in the sport for a really long time, and so he's used to this. And I'm like, dog, Bono might be used to it, but I am not, because I had a heart attack. Kimi gave me a heart attack. I think Kimi gave himself a heart attack. I would not be surprised if Bono had a mini one. Kimi's dad was there too. Kimi looked just as stressed as I was. I was so stressed for Kimi after that, and especially in the last lap. I was terrified that there was going to be some weird, miraculous George overtake, but there was not. So that was lovely. I'm not gonna lie, I almost cried. Kimi cried, and it made me almost cry. And normally I don't watch the last lap or the last lap. I do watch the last lap. I normally don't watch the cool down room. I normally don't watch the podium ceremony or anything like that, but I watched it this time. Because, second youngest driver and first win for Italy in 20 years. And it was a Kimi George Lewis podium. Direct quote, Kimi George Lewis podium, I love my life. Me on Sunday morning, because it was 2 in the morning LA time. Kimi was yelling on the radio. I'm very happy for Kimi. It was very well deserved. He had an amazing race, and it did almost make me cry a little bit, because it was literally Mercedes past, present, and future on that podium, and Bono was there, and it was Lewis's first time back on the podium, Lewis's kind of first time back on the podium in a long time, where it wasn't a sprint, because he did win a sprint race last year, but Bono was there for that, and they all took a picture together, and then George stepped aside so that Bono, Lewis, and Kimi could take a picture together, and it was really cute. That being said, that is all that I have for you today. Next week is probably going to be a break week, because as of right now, Chloe and I are both technically on spring break. We would like to not work over that break, so there will probably be a break week next week, but there is still F1 to watch, because where we would normally post on the 27th, there is the Japanese Grand Prix. And of course, we will do an episode for the Japanese Grand Prix, which will come out on April 3rd. And we will talk about what we're going to do instead of Bahrain and Saudi Arabia then. But until April 3rd, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels, and like this video, and find us on Instagram at Ithaca Cooldown Room. We'll see you next time. But until we do, have a beautiful 2 weeks. Mwah!